He may never have read the Constitution, but I have. So let me direct his attention to Article 1, which makes clear that only Congress has the power to declare war. We are the ones tasked with deciding when and how Americans are sent into combat. We are the ones charged with that most solemn duty. Yet Trump is acting as if Article 1 simply doesn't exist, as if obeying the Constitution is optional, as if a founding document is just a yellowing, crumbling piece of paper that he can crumble up and toss into the garbage can at will. This should not, must not be a partisan issue. No matter if you're struggling to pay rent, or if your name is plastered in fake gold on a building on Fifth Avenue, no one can ignore the Constitution, especially if you've sworn an oath to defend it. No matter if you're a Mar-a-Lago worker pulling down double shifts of the President of the United States, no one is above the law. Look, I believe fully that there are certain solemn, urgent times when our military must be called upon to defend us. There are certain moments when the threat in question is significant and imminent, instances when military force is the most effective tool at hand, and that using it is necessary to protect America and her interests. The thing is, from what little information the Trump administration has shared publicly that he hasn't immediately contradicted, and sometimes the same sentence, this was not one of those times. But if the administration thinks that I'm wrong and there was imminent, reasonable, actual threat to America, then guess what? The floor is theirs. Come to the Senate, which is 20 minutes from the White House. It's not hard to find. It's even faster in your motorcade, Mr. President. It's not hard to find us. We're the building with the big dome on top. We're only a 20-minute walk. Trump knows where the Capitol building is. It's the spot he told the insurrectionists to march towards on January 6th.
The air inside the grand hearing room was thick, heavy, with a suffocating tension. The very moment Senator Tammy Duckworth locked eyes with Donald Trump, turning a routine legislative proceeding into a historic showdown over the very soul of the United States Constitution. Duckworth sat tall behind her microphone, her posture radiating the unbreakable, rigid discipline of a combat veteran who had survived the absolute worst of war. Directly across from her, the former president leaned back in his leather chair, his arms defensively crossed over his chest, projecting an air of defiant indifference. With a steady, unwavering voice that immediately pierced the quiet hum of the chamber, Duckworth began her devastating indictment. She noted, with biting and surgical clarity, that while the man sitting opposite her may never have actually bothered to read the Constitution of the nation he was elected to lead, she certainly had. She directed his attention, and the attention of every silent observer in the room, straight to Article 1. Her hands gestured firmly as she emphasized that this specific article makes it undeniably clear that only Congress holds the exclusive, solemn power to declare war. They, the elected representatives of the people, are the ones legally and morally tasked with deciding when, where, and how American citizens are sent into the brutal, unforgiving realities of combat. They are the ones charged with that most heavy duty. Yet, she observed, Trump was acting as if Article 1 simply did not exist. She described his behavior as treating the obedience of the Constitution as a mere option, acting as if the founding document of the Republic was just a yellowing, crumbling piece of paper that he could thoughtlessly crumple up and toss into the garbage can at his own personal will. Trump's jaw tightened visibly at the accusation, a slight scowl forming on his face. But Duckworth did not relent for a single second.
Straight, every time I was rolled into yet another surgery, I made sure to read the poster I had next to my hospital bed. It was a framed copy of the Soldier's Creed, the words that those lucky enough to wear the Army uniform live by. That same framed copy now hangs by my desk here in DC. And as I glanced at it this morning, I realized that there's perhaps no greater proof that Donald Trump never deigned to serve a day in his life than the mockery he makes of the Soldier's Creed's commitments every single day he has been in office. The creed may be associated with the Army, but the sentiments hold true for all of those who wear the uniform of this great nation. Its 13 lines tells us to be disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained, proficient, and to look out for those who look out for us, to look out for one another. Donald Trump is supposed to be our service member's commander-in-chief. The very least we should expect of him is to epitomize the standards that we ask our troops to swear by, to live by. The very least we should expect of the commander-in-chief is to be as competent, disciplined, and professional as the men and women whose very lives hinge on his capacity to lead, on that competence and professionalism we expect to see in the White House. The Creed makes clear that our troops will never quit, that they will never leave a fallen comrade behind, yet Cadet Bone Spurs is someone who will always quit. And every hour he orders our service members to remain in unnecessary growing danger, he is proving that Donald Trump does not give a damn about leaving a comrade, or so many comrades behind.
She swept her intense, commanding gaze across the room, demanding that this critical issue transcend the bitter partisan lines that so frequently divide the nation. She drew a sharp, stinging contrast that echoed powerfully through the high ceilings of the chamber. It did not matter, she insisted. If you were a working-class citizen struggling desperately just to pay your monthly rent, or if you were a billionaire with your name plastered in fake, gaudy gold on a Fifth Avenue high-rise, no one can ignore the Constitution, especially someone who has sworn a sacred, binding oath to defend it. She pressed further, stating that whether you were an exhausted Mar-a-Lago employee pulling down grueling double shifts, or the President of the United States himself, absolutely no one is above the law. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze briefly darting to his counsel, but Duckworth's powerful presence held the entire room hostage. She acknowledged, with the profound solemnity of someone who intimately knows the horrors and chaos of a combat zone, that there are indeed urgent, solemn times when the military must be called upon to defend the nation. She conceded that there are specific moments when a threat is genuinely significant and imminent, instances where military force is the most effective tool at hand to protect America and her vital interests. But her eyes narrowed sharply as she systematically dismantled his administration's chaotic and reckless justifications. Based on the minuscule, fragmented trickle of information the Trump administration had shared publicly, information he frequently and haphazardly contradicted, sometimes within the exact same sentence. This was definitively not one of those urgent times. She threw down a direct, unapologetic gauntlet. If he truly believed there was an imminent, reasonable, and actual threat to America, she challenged him to prove it. She mocked the physical and metaphorical distance between them, noting with biting sarcasm that the Capitol was only a short, 20-minute motorcade ride from the White House. It wasn't hard to find, she reminded him, her voice dripping with historical weight. It was the very same building with the big dome that he had specifically instructed a mob of insurrectionists to march toward on January 6th. Trump's face flushed a deep shade of red, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair tightly as the historical weight of her words settled over the room.
Diplomacy. Once again, the Trump foreign policy doctrine has proven reckless, senseless, and dangerous. A doctrine in which fact and fiction are one and the same, one in which our commander-in-chief seems to come to military decisions by virtue of temper tantrums and announces them via tweet in the middle of the night, and one in which avarice outweighs advice every single time. Look, unlike Trump, I actually know what it's like to leave your blood soaking into the desert sand a half a world away. So I know what it's like. I know what it's like and what is at stake for the troops this administration is sending into harm's way. We must safeguard their valor and their professionalism by doing our jobs. I can tell you this, it's a whole lot easier to cover your eyes and order other Americans to sacrifice their children and sacrifice themselves if you don't have to do any of the sacrificing yourself. It's easier to send other people's children to fight in a war if you know your own children are cozy in a penthouse suite somewhere. It's easier to ignore the everyday realities of war from inside the hallowed halls of the White House, where you've got McDonald's being DoorDash to the Oval Office. But it's nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible if you've been actually outside the wire yourself. So I've come to the floor today to keep true a promise I first made over 2 decades ago. I ran for Congress, not because I wanted to be in Congress, not because I wanted to be a congressman or a senator. I ran for Congress to honor the men and women who carried me out of that bloody war zone. I made a promise that when the drums of war started beating again, I would be in a position to make sure that our elected officials fully consider the true cause of war, not just in terms of money, but in human lives.
The emotional core of the chamber shifted dramatically as Duckworth commanded everyone listening to sit up straight and confront the visceral reality of human sacrifice. She reached deep into her own painful, deeply personal history. She recounted the agonizing memories of being rolled into yet another grueling surgery, describing how she would stare at a framed copy of the Soldier's Creed next to her hospital bed. Those were the sacred words that those lucky enough to wear the Army uniform live by, words that now hung proudly by her desk in Washington. Her voice trembled slightly with raw, unfiltered emotion, yet it remained fiercely powerful, as she declared that there was no greater proof that Donald Trump never deigned to serve a day in his life than the absolute mockery he made of that creed's commitments every single day he occupied the Oval Office. She reminded the chamber of the creed's 13 lines, demanding discipline, physical and mental toughness, and the ultimate promise to look out for one another and never leave a fallen comrade behind. She demanded that a commander-in-chief should at the very least epitomize the competence and professionalism expected of the troops whose very lives hinge on his capacity to lead. Then, with the precision of a seasoned combatant, she delivered a devastating, meticulously aimed blow. She labeled him Cadet Bone Spurs, bringing his 5 draft dodges directly into the harsh light of the Congressional record. She accused him of being a man who will always quit when faced with personal danger, exposing a legal and moral theory where he could arbitrarily order others to face death, while he himself always found a way to retreat. Every hour he ordered service members to remain in unnecessary, growing danger, she argued. He proved he did not give a damn about leaving countless comrades behind. Trump scoffed audibly, a dismissive, agitated gesture that only fueled her righteous momentum.
Enough to prove why war with Iran is worth more children growing up without their mom or dad. They need to make it clear that they've thought this through and well enough that they can actually articulate what an end state with this war of choice in Iran would even look like. Then, when their case has been made, when the debate here in Congress is completed, then the members of this chamber must vote. It's our duty. Yes, it is our burden. It's the least we can do for those who are willing to sacrifice everything to safeguard this democracy. But if the Trump administration refuses to do that, if they refuse to adhere to the Constitution, well, then it begs the question, what are you hiding? What are you hiding, Mr. President? We already know you're incompetent. What else are you hiding? Look, we've now been at this war of choice, of Trump's choice, for a month and a half. Thousands are dead, grieving, wounded, suffering. Only someone as inept and unfit, someone as callous and cruel as Trump would see this as winning. Only a draft-dodging coward would think that this is the right way to engage in a war. Only a man so unqualified to be commander-in-chief would be proud to keep on risking our heroes' lives without even a concept of a plan for how to get them back home without risking more graves at Arlington. We can't let this chaos continue unchecked. As our troops continue to sacrifice whatever is asked of them, we senators need to do the absolute minimum required of us. That's why this week I'm calling up my War Powers resolution demanding that the Trump administration finally end this illegal war and to call for some actual public oversight and accountability on behalf of the American people. It will come to the floor for a vote shortly. So to my Republican colleagues, you have a choice, a simple one really. You can vote with me to end this conflict and show that you actually care about putting America first, like you claim, or you can vote to put Trump's ego first, proving that when push comes to shove, you care more about protecting Trump's thin skin than the Constitution that you swore to defend.
She stripped away his faux tough guy aesthetic by contrasting the gritty, bloody reality of war with the absurd, insulated privilege of his life. She spoke with undeniable, chilling authority about what it actually feels like to leave your own blood, soaking into the desert sand half a world away. She pointed out, with a mix of disgust and sorrow, how incredibly easy it is for a man to cover his eyes and order other Americans to sacrifice their children when he knows his own children are cozy and perfectly safe in a luxury penthouse suite somewhere. She forced the room to see the grotesque asymmetry of modern warfare, highlighting a leader who ignored the everyday realities of war from inside the hallowed halls of the White House, casually having McDonald's DoorDash to the Oval Office while young. Working-class Americans faced rocket fire. It is easy for him, she noted, looking dead into his eyes. But it is nearly impossible for anyone who has actually been outside the wire themselves to make such reckless, senseless decisions. Lowering her voice to a fierce, resolute whisper that echoed through the completely silent hall, she revealed her true driving purpose. She hadn't run for Congress because she craved a fancy title or the prestige of a political office. She ran to honor the brave men and women who had carried her bleeding body out of that active, bloody war zone. She had made a solemn promise that when the drums of war started beating again, she would force elected officials to fully consider the true cost of war, not just in terms of money, but in irreplaceable human lives. With thousands already dead, grieving, wounded, and suffering in a war of his choice in the Middle East, she demanded to know what the end state even looked like. She challenged the value he placed on the 13 American heroes who had fallen, asking if his personal safety and ego were worth more children growing up without their mothers or fathers. Only someone as inept, callous, and cruel as him, she asserted, would see this endless chaos as winning. Only a draft-dodging coward would think this is the right way to engage in a war, risking more and more graves at Arlington without even a concept of a plan to bring troops home. In her final, masterful strategic stroke, she announced she was calling up her War Powers Resolution to finally end this illegal war and demand actual public oversight and accountability. Turning her gaze away from the scowling former president, she addressed her Republican colleagues, effectively trapping them in a corner they could not escape. She forced a floor vote, looking directly at them and offering a simple, brutal choice. They could vote with her to end the conflict and truly show they cared about putting America first, or they could vote to put Donald Trump's fragile ego first. They could prove to the historical record that, when push comes to shove, they cared far more about protecting his thin skin than the United States Constitution they had sworn to defend. As she stepped back from the podium, she left nothing but the deafening silence of a fractured political establishment. She had reestablished the rule of law over a unitary executive theory that attempted to turn the military into a personal shield, proving that sunlight is always the best disinfectant against the shadows of midnight tweets. History was left to remember who stood up for the checks and balances designed by the Founding Fathers, and who folded under the pressure of a partisan loyalty test, leaving the world to ask if a president should ever be allowed to unilaterally bypass the Constitution to spark a bloody war.